Welcome back to Button Mash on WCRD 91.3 FM, the pulse of Ball State. With me today, I have Cory Rydell, the artist behind Critical Miss on Escapist Magazine. Cory, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How about you guys?
We're doing good, running ragged
perfect.
like students ought to. But yeah, so I've been a huge fan of you and Gray and obviously the comic Critical Miss pretty much since it started. Can you give us, for people who aren't totally familiar with the comic, can you give us a brief description of how it came about?
Well, first off, thanks. We started out pretty small, so it's nice to know or hear that someone was with us from the very beginning. But it's a comic posted on escapistmagazine.com, and it's just about games journalists just going through, and we just tell jokes all the time. We got started just in a competition that the website held just for some new content. They're just asking for a webcomic, and Gray and I just got together on the forums there and just submitted just what we felt were like quintessential webcomic, video game related type of material, and they liked it. It took off.
So you said you guys met on the forums of the website?
Yeah. There's a forum post regarding the competition, and I posted my piddly little DeviantArt account just like with some just noted like, hey, check out this piece and this piece, and he said, hey, you're adequate enough.
Sounds
writing
like great.
that is also adequate, and, you know.
Awesome. That's really cool. I'd never known that you guys had met like that. I just kind of assumed it was some sort of you both knew each other beforehand or something like that, and it was like, hey, let's do it.
Yeah, it's always great to hear how people meet on the internet over the randomest things.
Going on to another topic, I don't want to ask too typical of a question, but can you describe us what is the creative process for for creating a strip of the comic? Because I know you and Gray live incredibly far away from each other. So what's that like?
Well, we're not terribly far. He is technically in another country, but it's just Canada. They're not all that different over there.
No.
It's hard to say. Gray will probably have a better answer to this, because the creative process for me is I'll kind of badger him for 4 or 5 hours. He'll eventually give me a script, and then I just kind of sit down. I plan out panels. I plan out characters. Then I just get to drawing it, and then 6-7 hours later, there's a comic.
So are you basically always waiting on him then? That's what it sounds like.
I've seen some comics to that effect. So that's interesting. So does Gray ever have a hand in deciding what the strip might look like, or is that strictly you? Because the way you described it sounds kind of like it's very separated worlds there.
It's kind of separated. I keep him in the loop, because he reads tons of comics. He's reading all the time, just always sending me stuff. He has a really good eye for detail, so he's kind of like an editor in that regard. He's always kind of looking over to hey, you drew this arm really funny, oh, thumb's on the wrong side of the hand. Just obvious things like that I don't notice because I'm kind of going over quickly.
Okay. So kind of throwing stuff your way and being like, hey, it'd be cool if you took a note or a sort of observation from. That's cool.
Have you guys ventured off into has this led to any other kind of projects? Have you gone on to work with other people on other kind of content like this, or I guess I can ask him later, but yeah, have you gone to draw for anyone else or any of that sort?
I haven't really yet. I've kind of I've tried some other things. I've kind of put together a small pitch with other people who work for the Escapist, and I've done some other things, but nothing else has really ever taken off because everyone's kind of busy that I know, and I'm kind of busy, and so nothing's really done quite as well. I know Gray has worked with a bunch of other artists, whether it be for guest comics, and I know he writes some other things too.
Kind of hard to get something like that going in this industry, I know.
We've tried several times to make various different games, and just it's the sort of thing where it is kind of that detachment of working online that kind of makes it harder to get something off the ground.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Speaking of online, obviously Escapist Magazine website, and Critical Miss is hosted on it. What I know Gray is the more outspoken of you two. But what have you seen as far as community reaction dealing like with positive, which I'm sure there's plenty of, and also negative response? Because you guys really, in both writing and often enough the art, you don't shy away from controversial topics or something that might aggravate, the much more reactionary crowd of video gamers living in their basement.
Yeah, I can be in your face and to the point at times, but I like that. I'm new to the comic. Joe's been there since the beginning, but I didn't find out about you guys till like a month ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had a couple where just, like, people get really angry, and Gray's actually a little bit worse than I am, because I'll generally not respond to the people who are clearly just angry with us for having dared to have this audacity to put something on the internet that they had to click on to look at, and just like it had to be in front of their eyes. Sometimes Gray will hop on and just like he'll respond to the negative people, like 1 in 70 to 100 comments is negative, and it kind of sticks with him and it bugs him. But ultimately, everyone is just there's a lot of people who are just really happy with the comic, and you just gotta just let the negative comments slide to the side and just like realize how positive it is for some people, and like how we can spend a lot of time making other people, like a lot of other people, happy. Just like, oh, that was a funny joke.
What's
a bit better.
What's an example of? Has anyone notable come up to you or Gray and said like, this comic's really good. I've really enjoyed it so far, that you totally didn't expect to take notice?
Not really. I remember there's one tweet from Felicia Day.
Oh, okay.
No, in one of her vlog updates or something, where she was just like, hey, this is a cool comic. It's doing a thing with a female protagonist. And I was like, yeah, she's a cool person. She thinks the comic I make is cool. So therefore, happiness.
Someone cute and talented like Felicia Day. Yeah, you're on cloud 9 after that.
Someone whose name you can actually recognize.
You can
not
recognize,
just a random name on the internet in the comment section.
So, okay, my biggest question, and I'm going to definitely ask Gray this because I know he'll have a strong opinion of it. What do you think of like the role of webcomics? What do they serve in this industry? Is there room for them to like influence fans, developers, and other journalists, or are their roles sort of destined to be strictly reactionary? Because I've noticed that Critical Miss, like unless you're doing like an arc, which are great, you're typically reacting to like some sort of news or some sort of trend in the industry. One of my favorite recent ones was the EA responding to Call of Duty Ghosts with the dogs and like killing a dog in the first 5 minutes of Battlefield, and then the babies crashing through the window pane because What kind of role do you hope or think that comics ought to serve?
I think it's a barometer for like how the fans are feeling. Like, not all the people who play the game are going to read the comic, obviously, but if a comic, criticizes or like commends a certain aspect of the game, and it gets a tons of likes and it gets shared around a ton, people are going to see like, hey, this is what people liked. Hey, this is what people didn't like. And it's obvious, like games now, or it's obvious that webcomics now with like Penny Arcade, they definitely can serve like a huge influential part of the industry.
Yeah. Penny Arcade. That's a really good example. Probably the best current example I would imagine of a webcomic being able to fulfill some sort of role.
Now with what, three conventions?
Yeah, PAX East. Yeah. Oh, what I would give to go to PAX East. So that's a good answer, I think. With regards to like artistic growth and sort of also the role that comics serve in the industry, what do you think separates a good web comic from a bad one? Is it that sort of artistic growth? Because obviously Critical Miss started out as just the winner of a contest, or is it something like less intrinsic? Just a formula that's really good to nail down. So basically, what separates you or Penny Arcade from the dark, deep bowels that is Dorkly?
It's really hard to say, like, because humor and art is so subjective. So what makes a good piece is gonna vary from person to person. I I'd like to think it comes down to form, like the meta of the comic, the drawing it better, having the images more clearly representing what's going on, so there's more transference of the ideas to the reader, having like the right dialogue, like crisp and paced properly, like a comedian's joke, like the pacing and delivery of a comedian's joke is told throughout the like 3+ panels, you know.
Yeah, kind of. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, it's just something that you pick up over time, and like even if you don't quite have form, you may tell a joke that goes really far.
Yeah, certainly. The jokes that people still remember, your fans still remember to this day, like White Guy Defense Force. Lucas, did you read that one?
That one,
That was a
I
brilliant
really liked that one. That one just kind of came out of nowhere, and that was impressive. I had quite a couple chuckles on that. Strangle.
That one is almost the most commented feature on the Escapist.
On the Escape, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it.
It was inflammatory, to say the least. But I don't know. It's Ray and I are both white people. We think it's fair for us to make fun of white people.
Absolutely.
I love how it's the only minority that can like legally be made fun of or mocked, like in media.
Okay,
yeah.
So let's talk about what do you like really hope to achieve with Critical Miss in the near future? I know it's a pretty typical question, but you guys have done quite a lot in the, I want to say, is it 3 years, 4 years now going on?
Wasn't it 2010? Was it?
It's 3.5. Almost
3.5.
4.
So you've done stuff like the arcs with Erin, the main character of the piece, like dealing with the video game characters in her head, and she still sort of deals with that in the most current comics to a degree. Do you plan to like return to arcs like that, or is there some sort of format that you'd like to change it? Because it seems like you guys really aren't afraid to sort of diverge in any direction.
Yeah, I mean, we were a lot more experimental for a while there. We do still intend to keep like that story as canon-esque or whatever, but we found that the two strips, 2 pages a week, can't really convey a story because it forces you to have like a punchline at the end of every page. Which if you were reading like a comic book, say like 30 pages of just like a punchline, just like predictable at the end of every page, it would get kind of tiresome, and it ruins the pace of a story. So we're not quite sure what to be doing with the arcs for now, so that's kind of on hold. But like the hallucinations and stuff are all in there, and I mean right now we're just trying to keep on telling jokes that people like, you know, keep on entertaining people and refining kind of a setup and a punchline type of a style. That way, once we've crafted this aspect of our form, we can hopefully take it and experiment and diverge elsewhere.
Certainly a good outlook to have, and I like hearing that because I always wonder like when something like this might end or might turn into something different, because it's exciting and to see, you know, where one of your favorite properties might go. So while we have you still for another minute or so, let's just talk games. So did you grab a PS4? Are you grabbing an Xbox tonight? I know we're calling you on a Thursday, and
Xbox One comes out at midnight. There's lines everywhere.
What are you playing?
Stores.
Unfortunately, I'm not getting any of the new consoles yet. I'm unsure. I don't really want anything coming out yet. Like nothing.
Yeah,
I don't blame you. Yeah.
Like it's COD, it's Battlefield, it's whatever else
Assassin's
out
Creed,
right now.
Like sports games.
Yeah, and so I mean, right now I'm playing. I did actually a Battlefield 4 for my computer, the Ultimate console, the Master console.
Hey,
PC Master Race.
Lucas, you've made a friend.
Yeah, although I do plan on getting a PS4, and then hopefully an Xbox One eventually.
Then we can play together. Great.
Yeah, quality.
The PlayStation, I am leaning more towards. The Xbox had all that weird stuff with getting all up in your privacy that kind of bugs me.
Yeah, their PR was pretty bad.
Not supposedly going to do, but I don't know. Aside from that, just tons and tons of Dota 2.
Yes, I've seen those strips too. Poor Gray, just destroying himself over that.
He had a tweet today that was just an image from his Steam account that claims that he played 156 hours in the last 2 weeks.
Huh.
Wow.
Which no.
And you introduced him to that, didn't you?
Maybe more than there is in those 2 weeks.
That makes sense with him. All right, Cory. Thank you so much for talking to us, and we really appreciate it. We'll let you go here, and have a great weekend, man.
Yeah. Oh, and here, don't forget your trophy for being the first person ever interviewed on Button Mash. Here you go. Over audio.
Thank you.
All right.
Very cool.
Later, man.
All right, later.
Welcome back to Button Mash on WCRD 91.3 FM, the pulse of Ball State. With me today, I have Gray Carter, the writer behind the comic Critical Miss on Escapist Magazine. Gray, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
We're doing great. We just got done interviewing Cory, and he's a charming little fella.
We tried.
All right. I've been a big fan of Critical Miss pretty much since it started. I wasn't there exactly for when it started, but I definitely went back and read it all.
And I've been a fan for a week.
Because I introduced him. Can you, for those who aren't familiar, and who listen to the show, can you give us a quick explanation of like your view of how Critical Miss came about?
This is actually the least interesting story in the world, and I really should come up with a more interesting kind of.
You saved Cory
story.
from a band of wolves.
Maybe the origin's more interesting.
Raised him.
Basically, The Escapist ran a competition for a new webcomic. Cory and I have never actually met in person. We met on the forum. I pitched an idea to him. He threw some sketches together, and we went from there.
Awesome. Yeah, and we talked a little bit about that with Cory, and it was interesting to hear that you like just straight up met on that forum. We had thought that maybe you'd known each other before then. So we also talked to Cory about like his views on the creative process of sorts. It's two different worlds, I think, being the artist and the writer for something like this, especially when it's so separated like that, but has to work together. Can you give us your view of like the creative process? How does something like this come about twice a week?
Yeah, like does one of you tend to pitch the idea first and the other goes off?
I wish I could give you kind of an in-depth look at it, but it is really just something that happens kind of naturally for me.
Mm-hmm.
I keep an eye on the news, I play games, and ideas occur. There's no real kind of larger process for me. It's just a case of kind of refining a whole bunch of different ideas down to a usable joke.
Cool. So were you involved? Did you like start making comics as like a kid, or did this come about later in life? Or
I started my first webcomic, which is thankfully defunct now, when I was 13.
Wow.
And I was actually the artist for that one rather than the writer.
Okay, so you've been on both sides of
I did that for about a year, and then dropped out and never planned to do one again until the Escapist competition came up.
And it's been doing well ever since then.
Yeah, thankfully.
So yeah, concerning success and everything like that, what do you feel has been like the overall community reaction? Because we know, and I know certainly from following you on Twitter, that you're not one to shy away from pretty controversial topics, or at least topics that will light a fire under the more reactionary forum dwellers.
Trolls.
What do you see as sort of the community reaction, positive or negative, or the mixes of both?
It's difficult to gauge on a site like The Escapist because we have our own following. We have Critical Miss fans, but we also have a sizable audience who are Escapist readers. So on any given comic, we're going to have like a core group of fans who kind of share in-jokes and the callbacks and such. And then we have another bunch who can sometimes be very critical, sometimes they can be very nice.
So what's an example? What's an example?
Yeah, our audience is pretty diverse in that.
Cory was telling us about how Felicia Day once tweeted about Critical Miss, and that like really made him happy. Have you had a similar reaction to someone like telling you, "Hey, I really enjoyed the comic," that you didn't expect them to?
Mike Bithell, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The developer who developed Thomas Was Alone,
right,
which is one of my favorite games from this generation. When we said Thomas Was Alone was our best game of 2012. We kind of got chatting on Twitter, and we're kind of Twitter friends, I guess. You could call it that if that's not kind of creepy. And that is super cool, just having kind of almost a direct line to this guy who is making the games I really want to play.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably the beauty of social media like that now. Lucas, you have a question?
Yeah. So like, how much of an influence can like fan feedback, both like good and bad? Like, does it ever like influence which way you take with your writing?
I learned very quick. I learned during the first abortive story arc we tried that if you listen too closely, you'll produce something that pleases nobody.
Right.
Ever since we did that, and I personally think it was a bit of a disaster. Any given week, we'll have some people going, "Oh, you should go back to story arcs. They were more interesting than this." And then other people going, "Those were the worst things ever written. You should stick to gag strips." And then there's some people just saying we should give up writing altogether.
Well, nuts to them.
There's always going to be those people, though.
So speaking of like people who react to this comic in a positive or negative way, and I've certainly seen both sides on like the Escapist forums and everything. Corey had a pretty interesting answer to this, and I want your take on it. What role do you think webcomics serve in this industry, or should serve? Is there room for them to influence fans, actual developers of games, executives, other journalists, or is their role more destined to be like strictly reactionary? Because I see that that's a template that works for Critical Miss, is just like you said, staying on top of the news and responding to something that everybody will have a brief knowledge of.
So kind of like a political cartoon of sorts, but for video game industry.
I absolutely think they can have a huge influence. I mean, Penny Arcade is obviously the big player in that particular ballpark, and that went from webcomic to
multimedia,
the 4 or 5 largest kind of industry events available. Yeah. And it's just completely changed the landscape of how the cons and the advertising works. I think satire in general has a responsibility to be to keep people straight, I think, and particularly when it comes to developers. And perhaps that's kind of blowing my own trumpet a little bit, but I like to think we go for the right targets. Right.
Sort of directing the public consciousness towards what they ought to be paying attention to.
Now and again, and sometimes it's just things that bug me personally. Or sometimes I try and we did a little bit lately about how to talk about video games in a kind of less confrontational and less kind of roundabout way. And that was a joke, but it was also kind of a genuine attempt to kind of improve the discussion about games.
Awesome. So what ultimately separates a good webcomic from a bad one? Obviously, it's more or less all subjective, depending on, people love one strip and then hate you the next week and then come right back. But is there some sort of artistic growth that you've seen? Because certainly Critical Miss didn't start out as acclaimed as it did now. Or is it something less intrinsic? What separates you or Penny Arcade from the bowels of Dorkly?
I personally think the worst thing that can happen to a webcomic is success, because you find there's a lot of webcomics where they reached a certain level of quality that worked for them, and then they just stopped. That's just like everything from then on just was produced to that baseline. I'm not going to name any names because that would be a bit gauche, but
I don't want to point any fingers.
And the great thing about the webcomic format, particularly the Gag-A-Day format, is that it's about constant improvement. It's about hitting deadlines, and sometimes that means just kind of crapping out a not great strip, and we've done that. But it's an iterative process, and you do get better with each strip.
So what?
Until eventually you're producing something that you can be proud of.
So what would you say are some of the biggest improvements you guys have made over the course of the last 3.5 so years?
Let me think. The art obviously has improved.
Absolutely. Aaron no longer has 8 feet long arms.
Yeah. The layout. I mean, a lot of it's kind of technical comic stuff, which I could talk about for hours, but it would be completely disinteresting. I recently changed up how I do speech bubbles, and that's fascinating to me, but no one actually cares.
I mean, hey, you're talking to a college campus full of art kids, so...
That's true.
Well, yeah, we actually changed up our speech bubbles, and ideally you shouldn't ever really notice speech bubbles. They're supposed to be invisible if they're doing their job right. So there's a production element where after the first 6 months, we kind of hit... I think a decent level of quality, and we've kind of gone up from there. As for the writing part of it, I try to think a little bit more before I write strips now. I tend to do a lot of reactionary, off-the-cuff responses to things in the earlier strips that weren't always reasonable or particularly funny given the time.
So more of a building upon a topic over a period of time and reflecting on it.
Essentially, yeah. There's a very easy trap to fall into when you're doing webcomics, which is, I think Yarte mentioned this, where you can do a webcomic by simply taking a video game and then comparing it to the real world.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's
And you could literally just do that joke with every game and you would never run out of material. And we try to avoid that where possible.
so. Going on to like the style of Critical Miss and how it's been evolving. I know that you guys have done a number of arcs, and you've sort of experimented with the format here and there. I certainly loved the epic grand scale White Guy Defense Force comic. Cory said that was one of his favorites too. So what are we looking at in terms of where Critical Miss is going in the future? If it's going to go anywhere, are we returning to arcs? Or are there formats that you've been wanting to attempt that you haven't yet?
I don't think we're going to do long story arcs again.
And why is
purely
that?
Because we end up running into a problem where a large portion of our audience just aren't constant readers. They peruse occasionally. And story arcs just kind of destroys any kind of thread for them to follow.
Yeah. It's kind of like a lot of TV shows now, like Breaking Bad. Like, you can't just, like, jump into, like, the third season and stuff. But you can do it with, like, comedies. You can just watch, like, any episode, and you don't have to see the previous ones. Makes sense.
And I think we kind of have this, we have a fairly sizable body of work at the beginning now, so if we just started doing story arcs, people would feel like they were compelled to go through, like, 50 terrible strips, 150 kind of passable strips, and then so many good ones. I am going to take some of the ideas I didn't quite get to explore in Critical Miss and maybe do a spin-off of some kind in long form.
A spin-off?
That's pretty far on the horizon.
Okay. Yeah.
As for the strip itself, we're kind of looking to go a little bit away from the current topic jokes and more towards character-driven, classic comic strip style stuff.
Yeah, I think that would be a pretty good idea. Like, Erin Stout, the main character of the piece, seems... she had that huge, incredible arc with all the video game characters sort of breaking out of her psyche and influencing her in various ways. And I loved reading that because it started to turn this cartoon into someone who slowly were peeling away at the layers of their character. So... I know you did the Blue Rose of Ilium comic for Mass Effect, and that was a beautiful, brilliant side piece of work. You briefly mentioned like other projects on the horizon. What are some of those, if any?
Well, I do have another Mass Effect comic, which should be, with any luck, be out next week, if not maybe the week after. In a similar vein to Blue Rose, and I'm doing a comic called Mighty for a friend's comic startup. And that is a kind of jokey look at a Power Rangers style Super Sentai group.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Great. So while we have you here for another minute or so, let's just
talk about some good old video games.
Good old video games. Cory said he doesn't want any of the consoles out right now, and actually it occurred to me the kid in one of the more recent comics that gets his PlayStation 4 thrown away looks vaguely like Cory as Erin throws the PlayStation over her head. What are you looking forward to, if anything?
I'm a hardware buff. I like owning the hardware. I've already got a PS4 and I think I got a Wii U at launch.
You say you think.
But to be honest, the games aren't going to be there for the first 6 months, maybe the first year. If you look at the 360 launch and the PS3 launch, there was nothing on those consoles for the first 6 months.
Yeah, more or less, and we're seeing that with stuff getting pushed back to March and April.
Like Watch Dogs got pushed back,
or Infamous. I don't think Infamous was pushed
with
back.
Watch Dogs, Killzone Shadowfall was a lot better than I expected it to be.
Mm-hmm. I'm going through that right now.
And Resogun is pretty good, but there's not much on the PS4. And there is nothing I'm really interested in the Xbox One.
Yeah, it looks to me like Xbox has like Dead Rising and like maybe Forza and kind of that's it. Rise reviews.
I think they get Titanfall first, but that's also coming out on the PC. And
exactly.
I do have a PC. So.
Yeah. Hey, Lucas, you're making another PC friend. I'm alone here with my consoles. Great. All right.
Come join us, the dark side. We have Dota 2. I know you know all about that, don't you, Gray?
About what, sorry?
Dota 2. Do you play
Oh
a lot
god,
of it?
I've done 160 hours of Dota 2 in the past 2 weeks. Just do the math on that, and you realize how horrifying that is.
You know, that reminds me. Someone
I've been there.
gifted Dota 2 to me. Maybe now I need to get into it since a professional like Gray
Fabulous
can.
game, but it is digital crack cocaine.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a great interview as far as I'm concerned. I want to thank you, Gray, for coming on to the show with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gray. We appreciate it.
Where can people find you if they want to follow your work?
The easiest place to find me is The Escapist. That's www.escapistmagazine.com. And you can also find me on Twitter under Gray the Tick. That's Tick.
Awesome. All right. Thank you again, man. That we really appreciate it.
Yeah. Have a
Oh,
good
you're
one.
very welcome. Thank you.